I never thought the end of my marriage would come with the sound of a manila envelope hitting our bedspread. No shouting match, no slow unraveling. Just Courtney, standing there in her usual tailored navy suit, fresh from one of her back-to-back board meetings, her expression unreadable. She didn't say a word, just dropped the papers and walked out of the room like she was wrapping up a quarterly report. 15 years. 15 years of late-night lesson planning, of grading papers while she took red ice across the globe, of picking up dry cleaning and folding laundry and making her coffee just the way she liked it. All of that gone with one motion of her wrist. I remember staring at the divorce papers, not really processing what I was looking at. The words blurred together, legal language wrapped in ice. Irreconcilable differences. Division of property. Non-contested. I didn't even get the decency of a conversation. She didn't mention she was unhappy. She didn't ask for counseling or time apart. She just ended it. That morning, I kissed her goodbye before she left for work. And that night, I was a man without a wife or a home. When I finally managed to pick up the phone to ask what the hell was going on, she didn't even answer. Instead, some assistant of hers, some 20-something guy who sounded like he was smiling, told me I'd be meeting her attorney, Maxwell Crane, the next morning downtown. I'd barely slept in the guest room, too stunned to cry, too angry to scream. I kept expecting her to knock on the door and say it was all a mistake. That never happened. Meeting Maxwell Crane felt like walking into a corporate firing squad. The guy looked like he'd been carved from black marble. His voice was smooth, cold, every word wrapped in disdain. "You brought nothing into this marriage," he said, sliding another stack of documents toward me. "You leave with nothing." Just like that. I sat across from him in the stiff leather chair, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and jeans because I didn't even have the presence of mind to grab proper clothes. I didn't have a lawyer. Courtney knew that. She also knew I couldn't afford one, not on a high school teacher's salary. I had no idea how calculated it all was until that meeting. She had everything lined up, the timing, the location, the humiliation. She'd even booked me a motel room, handed off the key like I was an intern being relocated for a training seminar. Crane slid over a single check, $60,000. That was it. 15 years of love, sacrifice, compromise, and watch her rise from a mid-level software engineer to the CEO of one of the biggest tech firms in the state. She built her empire brick by brick, but I was the one holding the ladder. Every dinner I made so she could work late. Every parent-teacher night I skipped because she needed to prep for a pitch. Every damn weekend I spent alone while she flew to conferences. It was all behind the scenes. Unseen, unpaid, unprotected. Crane leaned back in his chair and told me flatly, "Take it or spend years paying to fight a losing battle." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to throw the papers back in his face and storm out. But where was I going to go? She locked me out of the house already. My name wasn't on the mortgage, something we'd agreed on back when we thought marriage meant trust. My bank account had $2,000 in it. Every vacation, every renovation, every gift, every shared expense had come from both of us. But legally, everything was hers. I was a guest of my own life. So I signed. My hand didn't shake. It just felt numb, as if I was signing someone else's future away. He gave me the key card to the motel she'd picked out. Not even a decent hotel, just one of those roadside places with flickering neon lights and a broken vending machine. When I walked into the room, it smelled like bleach and mildew. The carpet was damp near the window, and the bed was sunken in the middle. I dropped my single duffel bag on the floor and sat at the edge of the mattress, staring at the wall for what felt like hours. I didn't cry that night. Not because I didn't want to. I think I just didn't have it in me. 3 days after I walked out of that cold motel room with the same pair of jeans I'd been wearing since the divorce, I found myself standing in front of an old United Federal Bank branch on Parker Avenue, clutching something I hadn't laid eyes on in over 2 decades. It was a plain-looking ATM card. The plastic faded, and the edges frayed like it had aged along with me. My name, barely legible, was embossed across the front, and the magnetic strip was nearly worn smooth. My mother gave it to me the night before she died, her frail hand gripping mine with a strange intensity as she whispered, "Use this only when you truly have nothing left, Brian. Only then." I never questioned her. Even when I wanted to, I kept it locked in a box, hidden away with her wedding ring, old family photos, and the few things that made me feel tethered to her memory. I never used it. Not when I lost my job in 2009. Not when our car was repossessed during the rough years. Not when Courtney got promoted and we had to move, and I was left scrambling to find a new school that would hire me mid-semester. Not once, but now I had truly nothing left. My palms were sweating as I stepped up to the ATM. The air outside was hot and dry, but I felt cold, like I was doing something wrong, like I was cracking open a time capsule that should have remained sealed. I slid the card into the reader. It hesitated, like even the machine needed a second to register the relic I was feeding it. I typed in the 4-digit PIN. My birthday, July 11th, 1977. The screen blinked once, then again, before freezing entirely. I thought it had crashed. I cursed under my breath and reached out to cancel the transaction, but before I could touch the keypad, the door to the bank flew open. A man in a suit, mid-50s, maybe older, silver hair slicked back with sweat beading on his forehead, came rushing out like someone had set off a fire alarm inside. Sir, please come with me, he said, his voice trembling and eyes wide with something I couldn't quite read. Fear? Shock? He looked like he'd seen a ghost. I glanced around, half expecting cameras or some sort of prank show setup, but no one else was watching. Just me and this man whose name tag read Michael Trent, branch manager. I hesitated, unsure if I was about to be arrested for trying to use a defunct card or thrown into some bizarre identity theft mess. But something in his tone told me this was serious. So I followed him. He walked quickly, ushering me through the glass doors, past tellers who suddenly fell silent, their eyes tracking us with subtle curiosity. It felt like the whole branch had frozen. We entered a private office near the back, and he shut the door behind us, locking it with a quiet but deliberate click. He gestured to a chair, but I stayed standing. What's going on? I asked, my voice low, cautious. He sat, fingers fumbling to unlock a drawer and retrieve a thin manila folder. He opened it, hands shaking. This account, he said, barely above a whisper. It hasn't been accessed in 24 years. Not once, but it's active, and it has... Sir, I don't even know how to explain this. He turned the screen of his monitor toward me and tapped a few keys. The number that appeared made my knees buckle. I had to sit down. I had to. I stared at it, mouth open, my heart hammering in my chest. It didn't look real. I thought maybe it was a placeholder, a glitch, a test server accidentally connected to the ATM system. I leaned forward, reading the number again and again, trying to make sense of it. That can't be right. I muttered. My voice didn't even sound like my own. That's not possible. Michael shook his head slowly. It's real. It's been compounding interest all this time. There were deposits, large ones, structured, anonymous, and it's yours. Legally, officially, irrevocably yours. He pushed the folder toward me, and inside was the original account application, written in my mother's handwriting, signed and notarized the year I turned 22. There were letters, sealed documents, not to be opened except by me, and photocopies of old cashier's checks, each with a 6-figure sum. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, or run out of the building. The walls felt like they were closing in. My mother, my sweet, frugal, elementary school teacher mother, who clipped coupons and sewed patches onto my jeans until I was in college, had hidden a fortune in plain sight. And now, when I had nothing, no wife, no home, no job, no dignity, she had saved me from beyond the grave. $47,300,000. I stared at the number on the screen, as if looking long enough would make it make sense, as if the blinking cursor beside would eventually turn into an explanation. My mother, the woman who packed me peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in brown paper bags and bought our furniture from thrift stores, had left behind a fortune so large I couldn't wrap my mind around it. The bank manager, Michael Trent, sat across from me still visibly rattled, his voice barely above a whisper when he said, "Your mother, she wasn't who she let people think she was." He opened a second folder, much thicker than the first, and slid it toward me. Inside were documents, shares, investment records, legal transfers, and something else. A sealed envelope with my name written in my mother's handwriting. The slant of the B, instantly recognizable. My chest tightened just holding it. The paper had yellowed slightly with time, but her script was steady, the ink unbroken. I broke the seal with trembling fingers and unfolded the pages inside. I don't remember breathing as I read. My sweet Brian, it began, and I felt something in my throat snap. If you are reading this, it means life has brought you lower than you ever expected to fall. I didn't want that for you. I wanted you to build your own life, to be proud of what you earned, and I know you have. I know you gave your heart to everything, even when it didn't give back. I had to stop for a second, the paper trembling in my grip. Her voice echoed in my head, soft and deliberate, just like when she used to read to me at night. I kept reading. In 1982, I invested $60,000, every dime of the settlement from your father's accident, in a small venture firm. I told no one, not even your grandparents. It was a decision I made in a moment of fear and hope, and it changed everything. That firm went on to seed early-stage funding for companies like Intel, Cisco, and dozens more. I became the majority shareholder before you even started school. But I lived as I always had. I chose modesty because I wanted you to grow up grounded, to learn what it meant to work, to love, to value people and not things. Each word hit harder than the last. My mind was spinning with images of our old house, the cracked linoleum, the coupons, the Christmases where gifts were handmade. She had millions. She could have given us anything. But she chose not because she didn't love me, but because she wanted me to understand life without the distortion of money. This account is yours now. It has been set up in your name, tax cleared, and protected legally from any external claims. The conditions were simple. You could only access it when you had truly hit bottom. Not when you wanted a bigger house or a newer car or to take a fancy vacation. When you had nothing. When you needed to rebuild, not to indulge, but to become the man I always knew you were capable of becoming. There was a pause in the letter, then one last paragraph. You gave your heart to a life that didn't give back. That's not failure, Brian. That's integrity. Now you have a second chance, not just to survive, but to grow. Use it well, and know that I always believed in you, even when the world didn't. I didn't cry right away. I sat there in the chair, silent, hollowed out by a wave of grief I didn't know how to hold. I thought I'd already buried her. I thought I'd mourned. But this letter, this truth, opened a door to a part of her life I'd never even known existed. My mother, the schoolteacher with the quiet voice and modest wardrobe, had been quietly sitting on a multi-million-dollar empire, and she never touched a cent, not even when we were struggling, not when our heater broke during a snowstorm, and we used the oven to keep warm, not when I got into college and she told me we'd figure out together, even though I knew we didn't have the money. She could have lived in a mansion. She could have bought whatever she wanted. Instead, she left it all for me, for the version of me who had nothing left, because she knew that was when I'd need it most. Walking out of the bank that day, everything felt different. The world hadn't changed. Cars still rushed past. The air was still dry. People still avoided eye contact on the sidewalk. But I had. There was a quiet gravity in my chest now, a shift in my spine that I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't empty anymore. I wasn't powerless. That ATM card, that letter, that truth, it had given me more than money. It had handed me my name back, my dignity, and the ability to finally say no more. No more humiliation. No more silence. No more letting people like Courtney and Maxwell Crane decide what I was worth. I didn't rush into anything. I spent 2 nights just sitting with the weight of it, rereading my mother's letter until I knew the curves of every word. I sat in that motel room, lights off, curtains drawn, imagining what she'd say now, what her voice would sound like if she could see what Courtney had done to me, how she'd react to hearing that I was thrown out like trash after 15 years of sacrifice. And by the 3rd morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. It wasn't about rage. It wasn't about bitterness. It was about what was right. I started researching the best family law attorneys in the state, not the kind who advertised on billboards or ran commercials during daytime TV. I wanted someone who didn't need to advertise, someone who scared people like Crane. That's how I found Laura McConnell. She wasn't flashy. Her online footprint was minimal. But her reputation was formidable, known for taking on lopsided divorce rulings and flipping them like overturned verdicts. Her office didn't even list a public number. You had to be referred. I paid a retainer just to get a consultation. It was worth every penny. When I sat down across from her, she didn't waste time with small talk. She wore a charcoal blazer and no makeup. Her dark hair pulled back into a tight braid. Her eyes scanned the settlement agreement I'd signed like she was looking at a crime scene. When she finished, she didn't look up immediately. She tapped one manicured finger on the edge of the paper, slow and deliberate. "This is unconscionable," she said, finally meeting my gaze. "You were offered $60,000 after 15 years of marriage to a multimillionaire CEO." I nodded. "And you had no legal representation?" I nodded again. "That's duress, that's financial coercion. That's a textbook imbalance of power." I didn't say much. I didn't have to. She'd seen this before. Powerful spouses steamrolling quieter partners into silence. cutting them out with clean language and cold efficiency. But what made this different, she said, was how aggressively they'd force the issue. She called it predatory, manipulative, dangerous. Within hours, she had her team drafting motions to vacate the agreement. She cited lack of independent counsel, emotional duress, a drastic disparity in financial understanding. She included screenshots of the motel booking and Crane's threats during the settlement meeting. Everything was lined up with surgical precision. She told me this wouldn't be a negotiation. This was war, and we had the high ground now. 72 hours later, Maxwell, Crane, and Courtney were served. I didn't expect to hear anything directly, but late that night, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. A text message. She screamed and smashed her phone. It shattered against the wall. She hasn't stopped pacing for an hour. No name, just those words. I stared at the screen, stunned, until I remembered Courtney's assistant, Nico. Young, always quiet, always watching from the corners of the office. I didn't respond. That moment didn't bring me joy. It didn't feel triumphant. It just felt like a scale had tipped back toward balance. Like Courtney finally understood what it meant to lose control. She wasn't the hunter anymore. And I wasn't her prey. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth exposed, the damage acknowledged, the part of me she tried to erase brought back into the light. For the first time in years, I was no longer ashamed of who I had been. I was ready to fight for the man my mother believed I could become. The first time I stepped into that courtroom, I felt the weight of every moment I'd stayed silent. The polished wooden benches, the echo of footsteps, the smell of stale air conditioning mixed with paper and tension. Everything about it made my skin prickle. But this time, I wasn't walking alone. Lauren stood beside me, calm and unreadable, a legal scalpel in a sea of blunt weapons. The courtroom wasn't full, but it didn't need to be. Judge Helen Abrams presided from the bench like a woman who had no time for theatrics, her robe crisp, her gaze cutting through the silence. I'd read about her before, the kind of judge who hated legal manipulation, especially from the high-powered elite who thought they could bend rules with money and polished shoes. Courtney sat at the other table, stone-faced in a tailored gray suit, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Crane, perfectly put together as always, whispered something to her before standing to address the court. His voice was smooth, calculated, confident. He launched into a rehearsed explanation of financial realities, citing Courtney's executive position, her long-term contributions to their estate, and how the original agreement reflected proportional equity based on income. But he barely made it through 2 sentences before Judge Abrams raised a single hand and cut him off. "Mr. Crane," she said, her voice sharp but even, "are you telling me a man who supported a household, sacrificed his career, and was threatened into silence deserves less than a year's rent in Austin?" A collective breath sucked in from the gallery. I saw Crane's lips twitch slightly, his posture stiffen, and Courtney's jaw tighten as she stared straight ahead. The judge continued, her tone colder now. "Because if you are, I'd like you to explain that to every stay-at-home spouse in this state. On record." Crane stammered for a moment, then pivoted, trying to cite case law and precedents involving high-asset individuals and prenups. Judge Abrams didn't flinch. She leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her folder, eyes locked on him. "This isn't a case about numbers," she said. "It's a case about abuse of power, and I don't tolerate that in my courtroom." Lauren rose with quiet confidence, her stack of folders already open and color-coded. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word carried like it was etched in stone. She began with a clear summary of the original settlement, the lack of independent legal counsel, the absurdly low payout, and a timeline that coincided exactly with Courtney's Florida trip and secretive family exclusion. Then came the emails, Courtney's own assistant's messages, time-stamped and filled with scheduling notes about moving Brian's things out, even before the divorce was served. Lauren didn't rush. She introduced each piece like a blade laid gently on the table. Email from Courtney's executive assistant. Calendar entries showing she coordinated the separation like a product launch. A message to Crane. He won't fight. He never does. Just steamroll him and close it. Then came the witness testimonies. Former friends. Ex-colleagues of Courtney's. A retired investor who remembered Brian cooking dinner while Courtney closed her first funding round. An old neighbor who recounted seeing me raking leaves, walking dogs, organizing catered events for Courtney's firm in our own backyard while she flew to Hong Kong. One by one, they painted a picture of a man who had carried the invisible weight behind a rising star. I sat through it in silence, jaw clenched, hands folded tightly in my lap. It was strange hearing my own life laid out in evidence. Every forgotten sacrifice remembered by someone else. My job as a teacher had always been modest. I wasn't saving the world. But I had paid our bills when Courtney's first company failed. I had worked weekends while she took meetings in California. I had managed our home like it was a second full-time job. Not for recognition, but because I thought that's what love was supposed to look like. Lauren's closing argument was a quiet storm. This is not about gender. This is not about money. This is about a person who was systematically devalued until he believed $60,000 was all he was worth. This is about coercion dressed up in professionalism. This is about someone using their power, their resources, and their influence to silence a partner who gave everything behind the scenes. Judge Abrams didn't say much when court adjourned for the day, but she looked directly at me as she closed her folder, her expression unreadable but heavy with something I hadn't seen in years. Respect. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just sat there for the first time in years, not feeling small. The courtroom was cold, but not from the air conditioning. It was a kind of cold that came from tension, so thick it settled in your bones. Courtney sat across from me in her designer suit, perfectly polished, the same posture she used in investor meetings and boardrooms. Her face was composed, eyes calculated. But I could see it, the tightness in her jaw, the way her fingers kept twitching against the edge of her tablet. She wasn't in control anymore, and it was starting to show. That morning, she took the stand with all the confidence in the world, trying to redirect the narrative like she always had. Her voice was calm, her tone rehearsed. She painted me as vindictive, bitter, jealous of her success. She claimed that I was now chasing her money, that had only reappeared after discovering her net worth had gone public during a recent acquisition deal. She said it wasn't about fairness. It was about revenge. Her words echoed through the room like knives thrown under the pretense of grace. I didn't flinch. When it was my turn to respond, I stood slowly, adjusted my jacket, and walked to the center of the room. My voice was quiet, steady. I looked at her, not as my ex-wife, not as the woman who discarded me, but as someone who had rewritten the truth and expected everyone to believe it. I'm not here for your money. I said, I'm here because what you did was wrong. Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she couldn't quite believe I was speaking plainly in front of all these people, shedding the careful performance we'd lived inside for years. But I kept going. You didn't divorce me because we grew apart. You discarded me because I didn't fit the image you wanted to show the world anymore. I was good enough when you were struggling, when your firm was nothing more than pitch decks and overdrafts. I was good enough when you needed someone to carry the weight at home, to support your dream while I let mine go. I could feel the silence around me shift. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. My mother's gift didn't make me greedy, I continued. It gave me options. Options you never imagined I'd have. You banked on me having nothing. You planned around it. You put me in a corner, knowing I couldn't fight back. You had everything lined up, until I didn't need your charity motel or your lawyer's threats. Her face cracked, just for a moment. That mask she wore, cool, unbothered, superior, it slipped. Her lips parted slightly, her chin trembled, but she said nothing. She couldn't. The room saw it, the lie unraveling in real time. Crane stood up, his voice sharp, trying to regain control. He tried to paint my inheritance as a lucky break, an irrelevant twist. His financial situation has changed, he said, like the money erased everything I'd endured. This wealth has no bearing on the fairness of the original settlement. But Lauren was ready. She stood slowly, her fingers resting on the table, like she didn't even need to raise her voice to level a courtroom. That's exactly the point, she said. It proves that the coercion was built on lies. They treated him like he had nothing, like he was helpless. But he was never helpless. He was convinced to believe he was. They exploited what they thought was his weakness. And now that he's standing on his own, they're panicking, not because he's wrong, but because he finally has the means to hold him accountable. The judge didn't say anything right away. She just looked between Courtney and Crane, then over to me. There was no vindication in her eyes, just a deep, cutting awareness that something ugly had been dragged into the light and couldn't be ignored anymore. That day wasn't about proving I was rich. It was about proving I was never worthless. The morning of the final ruling, I sat at the plaintiff's table in complete silence, feeling the gravity of everything pressing down on my chest. But this time it wasn't fear. It was finality. The trial had taken its toll. Weeks of testimony, cross-examinations, and endless scrutiny had peeled back layers of a life that, for too long, I had let exist in the background. But now the truth stood in full view, ugly, undeniable, and irreversible. I hadn't come to destroy anyone. I'd come to reclaim the part of myself I had let die quietly in service of someone else's ambition. And finally, after all of it, we were at the end. Judge Abrams entered the courtroom with her usual command, robe flowing behind her like a warning. Her presence alone was enough to still every voice in the gallery. The room was packed. Reporters sat elbow to elbow with legal interns and curious spectators, all waiting for the gavel to drop. Even Courtney's side of the courtroom had changed. Fewer supporters, more tension, her team sitting stiffer than usual. She didn't look at me once. Judge Abrams didn't waste time. She began reading her decision with the same deliberate cadence she'd maintained throughout the entire case, her voice level but unflinching. In reviewing the evidence presented, she said, flipping a page, "It is clear that the original divorce settlement was made under coercive circumstances, without adequate representation, and with an egregious imbalance of power. This court finds that the agreement in question is null and void." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I watched Courtney's spine stiffen beside Crane, whose jaw visibly clenched. Though he tried to appear calm, Judge Abrams continued, "All marital assets shall be divided equally," she said. "This includes a primary residence, investment portfolios, luxury vehicles, retirement funds, and all business holdings acquired during the course of the marriage. These assets shall be liquidated unless both parties agree otherwise. The proceeds will be split 50-50. I saw Courtney shift in her seat, the tight composure on her face beginning to fray. The media row leaned forward as pens began to scratch across notepads. But it wasn't over yet. "In addition," the judge said, lifting her eyes briefly to look directly at Courtney, "this court awards the plaintiff's spousal support in the amount of $475,000, payable over the next 3 years. This ruling reflects a financial disparity at the time of separation, the plaintiff's contribution to the defendant's career, and the need to restore equity." Courtney didn't speak. She didn't argue. She just sat there, stunned pale, her lips pressed into a bloodless line as though the numbers themselves had knocked the air out of her. Crane leaned in and whispered something in her ear, but she didn't respond. Her hand stayed frozen on the table. Perfectly manicured fingers curled slightly, as if trying to grip onto something that had already slipped away. Around me, cameras clicked. Reporters were already moving toward the hallway to file statements, but I didn't hear them. I barely registered the motion around me. Lauren touched my arm lightly, a signal that it was done. I nodded once, slowly, then stood. I didn't turn around to see her face again. I didn't look for confirmation, or reaction, or closure. I didn't need it. I walked past the rows of benches, past the murmurs and the flashes, out the heavy doors and into the sunlight. The air outside felt different. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking under a weight. My shoulders were back, my spine straight. The sky over Austin stretched wide and blue above me, and I took a deep breath. Not because I had won, but because I had survived. Because the man who walked into that courtroom weeks ago wasn't the same one who walked out. Not anymore. 6 months after the courtroom doors closed behind me for the last time, I found myself standing in front of a chalkboard again, holding a piece of white chalk, the scent of old textbooks and dry erase markers filling the room like a memory I'd almost forgotten. The school wasn't fancy, not some private prep academy or experimental startup. Just a quiet public high school tucked between neighborhoods, with squeaky linoleum floors and bulletin boards lined with outdated flyers. But it felt like home. The rhythm of the school day, the voices in the hallway, the soft hum of students settling into their seats. It grounded me in a way no courtroom or check ever could. I didn't come back to teaching because I needed the money. I came back because it was the one thing I'd done in my life that never asked me to be anything but myself. My apartment was small, but the view stretched over the hills outside Austin, and every morning I'd wake up to sunlight spilling through the windows in a way that made me feel like the day was mine before anyone else could touch it. I picked out furniture I actually liked this time, warm with tones, soft leather chairs, a bookshelf I built myself, and filled the place slowly, piece by piece, not rush and complete it. There was no longer anyone to impress or keep up with. Just me, living with intention instead of performance. I started reconnecting with old friends, the kind I'd let drift away during the years I spent orbiting Courtney's world. I met Greg, an old college roommate, for drinks after work one Thursday, and we stayed at the bar until midnight laughing about things that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or IPOs. I joined a local book club. I started running again, not for fitness goals or image, but because it made me feel like my lungs belonged to me again. And then there was the coffee shop. It was nothing special, just a little corner cafe near the school where the staff knew my name by the second week. I was grading papers, half distracted by the buzz of conversation and the smell of cinnamon, when she asked if she could borrow the chair across from me. I looked up and saw her standing there, a little windblown, scrubs under her jacket, her smile quiet but certain. Her name was Melissa. She was a nurse, a single mom, worked nights at a nearby hospital, and loved bad 80s movies and blueberry scones. She didn't ask me what I did or what I earned. She didn't blink when I said I'd been through a brutal divorce. She just listened, eyes kind, nodding when I spoke, asking questions that made me feel like I mattered not because of what I had, but because of how I saw the world. We talked for over an hour about teaching, about parenting, about how strange it feels to start over at a point in life when most people expect you to have it all figured out. Before she left, she grabbed a napkin, scribbled her number on it in looping, slightly rushed handwriting, and slid across the table with a grin that didn't feel practiced. I took the napkin, folded it carefully, and slipped it into my wallet next to the one thing I hadn't touched since the day I used it. The old ATM card. The money was still there, sitting in the account quietly, growing with interest and untouched possibility. But I didn't need it to feel safe anymore. I didn't need it to feel whole. Because what my mother gave me, in truth, wasn't just financial freedom. It was a way back to myself. It was the push I needed to remember that dignity isn't something other people give you. It's something you choose to keep, even when everything around you tries to take it. And for the first time in years, I was choosing it every single day.